Nearly all of us delight in stories of reversal. This is probably why so many of us are fascinated with the telling and the retelling of Cinderella, whose story finds itself in European roots several hundred years ago and then was brought out of obscurity and anonymity to the film and music by people like Roger and Hammerstein. In fact, Cinderella has made a revival debut. She's showing up at Broadway this season. And of all of my favorite Cinderella stories of return is probably Jerry Lewis's Cinderfella. It's a really corny story, but it appeals to many of us because we are captivated by reversals. The stepdaughter is living under the custody of her stepmother, who marries her father for his inheritance, and she has to live in a subjected role with her wicked stepsisters, who she then has a fairy godmother who gives her an opportunity to go to the ball. She meets the prince, but at the strike of midnight, she has to run. She leaves her shoe behind. And the moral of the story is, if the shoe fits, wear it. It's kind of corny, but we like reversal stories, stories of restoration. Israel had often been identified as the oppressed, the dejected, the rejected, those who lived in the margin. And so now we have this psalm of these pilgrims that I'd like to say a few words this morning in your hearing about this whole idea of God's reversal and how you can celebrate with God today over his reversal in your life or in the life of someone else. God is a God of reversal. When the Lord brought back the captives to Zion, we were like men who dreamed. Pinch me, am I dreaming? They had lived in a nightmare for 70 years, and now they were living in what appeared to be a dream. Like a weary traveler crossing the desert dunes and seeing an oasis in the distance and near. To wake up and for the mirage to disappear, unable to recall the details of the dream, never changing the realities. They said, we felt like we were dreaming. But they were not dreaming. They were on their way home. Several years ago, I was preaching in Asheville, North Carolina. My hotel was adjacent to this wood house that I learned belonged to Thomas Wolfe. It was the home that he grew up in. I went over to the now museum, and while there, picked up a copy of Thomas Wolfe's Look Home with Angel. And I read that book over the weeks. And there's a section in that book divided into parts 1, 2, and 3, where he gives a long dissertation on home. Many people believe that Eugene Oliver was really Thomas Wolfe's retelling of himself. And there's a scene in there that's all summed up on a page with one line: home is the place where you can't go again. You can't go home again. It's also the words of a man who is living meaninglessness and rootlessness, separated from an environment that he needs to survive. Home is a place where you can't return. I'm a Robert Frost fan. I like reading Frost. And Frost, I later discovered, answered the meaningless claims of Wolfe when he said, home is the place where they got to take you in. I like the way Frost said that, the American poet. Home is the place, regardless of where you have been or what you've become or what you've done or what you've encountered or how life has handled you or you've mishandled life. Home is the place that they got to open the door and let you back in. I like that. And for those of you who said what that got to do with anything, it got to do with everything. Looked like Frost read Jesus and Tom Wolfe did not. Because Jesus said it in the immortal words, I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go to prepare a place for you, I will return and bring you home, that where I am, there you may be also. Home is the place where they got to take you in. Jesus says all of us can go home to God. But don't we make a mistake at times when we read line 1 to give too much credit to human agency and dismiss the great divine agency. We know Cyrus of Persia is the one who gave the key to unlock the manacles. But if you stop there and not see God in history, you miss it. It's God using human agency to fulfill his great divine purposes. And God has a way of using even those that we would discredit to fulfill his purposes. Don't underestimate how God can use people, use things, and use circumstances where we all come back and say that when the Lord got me back home, I thought I was dreaming. How do you react when God gets you back home? Our mouths were filled with laughter. Our tongues had songs of joy. Our hearts leaped with gladness. 70 years separated from the place where they called home, going up to Jerusalem to worship. Now in the distance, they see the doors that have been closed, not just in their imagination, but upon history now swing open to invite them as returnees and refugees coming back home, walking across the desert dunes, and they look in the distance and the doors open and they're on their way up to Jerusalem. That had just been a figment of their imagination for 70 years. Now they're coming home with laughter on their lips, songs of joy on their tongue, gladness on their hearts. That is, they had some evidence, characteristic of how you ought to act when the Lord has set you free. They're on their way back, and laughter, song, and gladness. And yet, in contemporary Christianity, there seems to be something dour and sour and lifeless and listless and anemic about our Christian experience. We wait for the drum major to tell us, what to do, how to act. But when you know for yourself what the Lord has done for you, shouldn't there be some laughter on your lips and some song of joy in your heart and some gladness in your life when you think about stony the road we've trod? Nobody ought to have to tell you, have a little laughter on your lips. What are you laughing for as bad as life's experiences have been for you? You said it, as bad as they had been for me. Look now at what the Lord has done. And you don't have to have everything you want to have laughter on your lips and a song in your mouth and gladness in your heart. Just the fact that you're here ought to be enough to say, I got the evidence that God has been good. Notice the change of tenses here. It says, the nation said the Lord has done great things for them. And then Israel said, the Lord has done great things for us. On one hand, there is a themness in the text, where the them testify based off what they see in you of what your God has done. That today when people encounter you who work next to you, live in an apartment across from you, those who are in school with you, they ought to see the characteristics of one who has been delivered and say, look at what that God is doing for them. And that ought to happen by saying at times, and I know the sorry experiences that they have had come that way, where things have not always been good, but the Lord has been good to them. And then in return, you ought to be able to say, look at what the Lord has done for us, for the Lord has been good to us. Because the truth is, a testimony is always greater than an argument. Folk can argue all day over what the Lord won't do. You don't have to argue with them. All you have to do is say, look at me. I'm evidence of what the Lord has already done and what the Lord is doing. That young boy was blind. The religion leader said, you won't see. And he simply said, all I know, I hear what you're saying, I'm not supposed to see. All I know, I know you saying that Jesus is not a healer. All I know is when I woke up this morning, I was blind, but now I see. I don't know what your testimony is, but that's the one you ought to tell and say, I don't have to argue with you over what the Lord has done. You can argue all day over what the Lord will not do. I am exhibit A, that I know for myself what the Lord has done.